Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to the Restoration Couple. Today's video is all about cladding the last section of our block wall. And we started this project last year. We did the 10-15 meters down that way. We're going to get this done, and then later on in the video I'll be explaining some of the answers to questions we receive on a weekly basis. Let's make a start. And there we go, we got to a point where it's all clad all the way up to the pizza oven, and it looks pretty smart. Of course, it's a slightly darker colour. This will silver down like the others. But let's jump into some of those questions that I get on a regular basis on the other wall project. Here we go, let's try and answer as many of the questions that I can think of that we get on the wall that we did last year. You might be able to catch a glimpse of it in the shot that's there now. You can see the, look at those doves. That's cute. The little collared doves have just hatched. They're on top of the cladding. It's as if I meant for it to happen. Now, first up, the gaps. With timber, you always run the risk, if you did butt them up to start with, although they will shrink if they're pressure treated, they also will swell. So if you butt them up too close, they can pop off and distort. So it's good to have a gap and design that in if they're square edge timber. If they're tongue and groove or shiplap or feather edge, then you don't need to, you've got a lap there to cover that gap. So I don't want to freak our little dove babies out. Are they squabs if they're doves? Or is that just pigeons? But you can see here, here's probably a good comparison on the 1-year-old cladding versus now. These gaps, this has been up about 2 months now, so these gaps have opened up a little bit, but it won't be long before they match up. And over the winter and over the summer, you will actually visibly see these gaps will expand, and it just does show you how much wood changes over the seasons. It's not some sort of building myth. When people are talking about expansion gaps in flooring or decking, it really does happen, and it's quite obvious when it's on a wall like this. So if you can design the shadow gaps into being a feature, then you're not going to be grumbling about it a year on when you've got gaps there and they're not regular. So start off, use those spacers. Again, you also want to plan out where your board's going to finish and stop, so you don't have to be ripping them down on table saws and stuff if they're too wide or too narrow. So if you can start with a full one on the top, or at least measure down from the top and then start on a board and work up. Next up, timber choice. Right, so I've got a couple of offcuts here. Basically, this is super cheap stuff. There's nothing special about it. Just don't think that your DIY store is the only answer. Find a sawmill or even just a builder's merchant. And this is fencing supplies. So this 6-inch or 150mm board is sold usually as gravel board. It's what you would put at the bottom of your feather edge fencing. This is a 4-inch or 100mm equivalent of this. It might be sold as gravel board sometimes, or our sawmills sell it as hit and miss boards, because you would use it, if you imagine a bit like a barn, if you do that sort of cladding on the side, where you have alternating, so that one's battened over the next to close it off. So hit and miss boards is often what they're sold as. So width of them, or thickness, is 22. So they're essentially just 1-inch boards, obviously slightly less than that. So 6x1, 4x1 in old money. Now the battens that I used on the actual block wall first, I went with 35mm by 50. Now those, in fencing terms, if you go to a sawmill or a fencing supplier, they'll be sold as counter rails or counter battens. And again, that's usually what's installed at the back of the feather edge fencing at the top before you cap it off. But again, all this stuff is just rough sawn treated timber, all softwood. Yes, you could use hardwood, you could use all sorts of fancy plain timber, but this really does silver down nicely, and there's no soil contact. There's loads of ventilation behind. There's no reason why this won't last, much longer actually than fence panels, because it's such a thick timber. Other questions are about oiling it and treating it and painting it. Painting's an option, if you wanted to colour it, of course you could do that. Always with treated timber, it's better to let it dry out, at least for a few weeks, if not a few months first, before you paint it or do anything to it really. You'll see that this section here is a different tone. It's a year old over there, but even that wasn't this nice golden brown colour to start with. When I was talking to the sawmill about it, they said, so I think when they pressure treat larch, it comes out more of a darker brown, whereas maybe some of the other softwoods don't, but I'm not certain what that is. Maybe it's just a different process. Sometimes you get that greeny sort of look from pressure treated timber, and sometimes it's more of a brown colour. Either way, it'll all mellow down and silver. We do quite like this look, so there is the option to spray or paint the whole lot, or stain it at some point. And you could potentially try and preserve whatever colour it starts up with by using a UV oil. But UV oils are really more designed for planed and smooth timber rather than rough sawn like this. Other questions, hardware. The battens that go onto the wall, 6mm, straight through. Normally just using the SDS, you can just drill straight through the wood as well, it's any rough work. Straight through, straight into the block work, and then I think they're normally 80mm concrete screws that I use. Now they don't need plugs, contrary to lots of the comments in that first video. You just go straight in. They're just a hex or a T Torx shaped star head on them, straight through into the concrete, and they bite in, pull it in, and I've been using them for I don't know, 8-9 years, and I've never had anything fail. You do want to make sure though that your hole is, you don't really need to blow it out with this sort of work, but it's good to make sure that it's not packed full of dust, because they do bite in better on a clean hole, especially in concrete. And then as far as attaching your boards, whatever boards you go for, to your batten, I mean, I know I'm not one to talk because any excuse for a new tool, and I'll try and justify it to myself. A nail gun is not the only option. I used it because, one, it's nice and fast, and two, I have one, and it sinks those fixings, those nails in, nice just below the surface. They don't seem to show up as much as screw heads do. But that said, there's loads of screws, trim screws, decking screws with smaller heads, if you want it to be really subtle. Galvanized ring shank nails are not coming out anytime soon. They're super solid. Just make sure, just for my OCD, that you get nice straight lines. So like I do, I kind of tack them in place with some little brads, and then I do a spirit level, or you could even lie your boards out on a table and mark them up, just so that you know that when you get it all fixed on the wall, all your nails and fastenings are going to look lined up. There's nothing worse than looking past a nice new build that's got all of its cedar cladding and there's stainless steel nails looking like someone was having a beer whilst they did it. The parents of these doves have been living in the apple tree just above the pizza oven, so we've had no pizza action going on for the last 3 weeks, but the girls have named them mozzarella and pepperoni, the mum and dad, so they'll have to think of some names for these two now. Another little thing, we get quite a lot of questions on the lighting which we use, because it's obviously in the back of the project video for the barbecue. I will leave a link to these. We were just holding out for something that's a bit more durable and then we don't have to worry about, and it's going to last for a good few years, rather than the fairy lights and solar stuff which just tends to be rubbish. These are LED, they're dimmable on a timer. They're not the cheapest, but they're really, really decent. So I will leave that down in the description below, along with anything else we use, maybe the fastenings and the fixings, just to help people out if you're trying to hunt those down. Sawmills, doesn't really matter where we bought ours, just find the same, find a sawmill near you. There's fencing gets done all over the country, so you will have something like this. You don't need to travel too far. Just don't be confined to the DIY stores. Not that that's a bad thing, but you'll never get 4.8 meter lengths and you'll have joins and that sort of thing. So there we go, that's the cladding done and dusted. Hopefully the wind noise hasn't been too much today. It is not the nicest weather, hence why there's a slab over our new grill. But if you haven't checked it out already, this is our custom barbecue fire pit table, which we've just started to put the videos out on. I'll try and link it to the end at this one, at the end of this video, but also as part of this series, we've got the self-binding gravel, which we used here, which is like a self-binded compacted Cotswold style gravel, and also how we built all these scaffold table benches and all that stuff. So there's a load of stuff coming out on this area, and hopefully when the weather gets better, we'll be out here enjoying it. But thank you for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time. As these little babies have only just fledged, I think I might try and find a few jobs to do out in the garden, just in case that nasty sparrowhawk flies in, because last year they didn't last more than 2 days. So hopefully these guys will get a bit stronger and they'll be away. I think mum and dad are around somewhere.